The first globe. As best they could, the governments of Earth sought to dissipate the panic, pointing out that few lives had been lost and urging greater efforts in the production of the air mines. Already the first great steelite globes were rolling out of the big factories and were quickly being fitted with the charge of explosives. It was early on the morning of the 12th that the first air mine was finished and released. Dr. Howard and I superintended the process, which took place outside one of the great Pittsburgh steelite works that was turning out the globes. Anchored securely to the ground, the globe was slowly exhausted of its air by the giant air pump that had been equipped for the task. The pump was disconnected. Then the globe was removed to a large open field nearby and re-anchored. We could see clearly that the mighty globe, of incredible lightness, was straining upward with such force against the anchoring chains that held it that it seemed they must part. Dr. Howard reached forth and turned the lever that held the great globe anchored. There was a whizzing sound, a puff of air in our faces, and the great air mine had vanished, rushing upward at such tremendous speed that it had seemed to disappear before our eyes. We all gazed up after it, as though to follow its course upward until it floated at last on the surface of Earth's atmosphere. I think that the same thought held us all. This air mine, this single globe we had released, it seemed such a puny weapon to use against beings who from mighty ships had let down the colossal trawl upon us. Was there actually any hope for us in this method? Perhaps this doubt was felt by many then, but there was no cessation of the work, which after all held our only chance of striking back at the great space invaders above. By the next day, here and there over Earth's surface, scores of the air mines were being released, to rush upward. In Germany and the English Midlands, in Russia and Pennsylvania and Indiana, everywhere on Earth's surface where the air mines could be made and assembled, they were being released in groups. The great industrial leaders of the world had gathered, under Dr. Howard's heading, to devise plans for the quantity production of the air mines with the greatest possible speed. Already great factories were being hastily equipped with special machinery, and the explosive factories of the world as well as those producing the repelling devices were working night and day to manufacture the needed materials. By the 15th, scores of the globes were being released each hour, here and there over the world, and their number was rapidly increasing. Dr. Howard was sleeping but 2 hours out of 24, it seemed, remaining night and day at the Washington office that had become the center of the world's activities. He estimated that within a week the air mines would be pouring forth at the rate of 1,000 a day. The great danger, he said, is that the next attack on us might hit one of the great cities so hard that the inevitable panic will cause a cessation on work on the air mines. But how long is the work to go on in any case? I asked. There must be thousands of globes floating already upon the atmosphere's surface. There need to be tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, he said solemnly. They must be sent forth until these terrible trawlings from above have entirely ceased. I shook my head, for I could see that already many, tired of the ceaseless work, were crying out that the scheme was a crazy one. Others had begun to say that whatever space visitors had been above had already departed. But these statements were swiftly silenced on the next morning, that of the 16th, by the fifth catastrophe. This fifth blow took place at one of New York's residential suburbs, Scarsdale, and while it took a toll of life exceeded only by that of the Chicago horror, it was different from the others in one odd respect. The great trawl seemed to descend and gouge along the earth with somewhat smaller speed than in the other instances, and was seen very plainly and even escaped from in time by some people in the vicinity. It was described as being very like the familiar steam shovel scoop in shape, but of a glittering metal that all agreed was not native to the earth. The top of it, what supported it, ran up into the mists of the morning sky. There were many shining strands, and very slender for the colossal weight they supported. They gleamed with strange light, and it was the opinion of many that if they were of metal they had in some unheard of way been given supernatural strength. At Scarsdale perhaps 1,200 perished in the sweep of the giant scoop, which seemed to make a smaller gash than usual. A few who had heard the trawl crashing toward them had managed to flee from its path in time to escape it. Hope and fear. This fifth catastrophe marked the beginning of the terror's last period. Until then Earth's peoples had hoped against hope that in some unexplained way the whole business was the result of natural forces, but now they could no longer doubt that far overhead were hovering vessels or vehicles dragging their trawls here and there over the Earth's surface for their own unfathomable purposes. Dread was upon the earth. At any moment of day or night the giant trawl might crash down in terrible annihilation. It was the sword of Damocles, suspended over a helpless world. The days after the Scarsdale terror saw the world's activities at their most intense pitch. Dr. Howard and I were occupied without end in the direction of the manufacture and distribution of the air mines. For he was now having them released, not at the factories where they were assembled, but at various points over the earth, so that they would cover more uniformly the surface of the atmospheric ocean. Day after day we sent them out. I know that to me those days were part of a dream of nightmare activity and tension. Again the world was waiting in dread for the coming of the great trawl. It did not come again, for reasons which we shall never guess, until the 19th. That interval of 3 days between trawlings was the longest that had yet elapsed. We owe much to it. Perhaps our world. For in those days the air mines were whizzing upward in fast increasing numbers. By the 19th they were ascending at the rate of more than 1,000 a day. All of Earth's peoples, in the industrial regions at least, seemed toiling upon the one task of making the great globes. The world's hopes were raised. We were winning, it seemed, by sowing the atmosphere's surface thick with air mines that sooner or later must demolish all or part of the space invaders. We were exultant, even. And then, shortly after dark on the 19th, a trawl flashed down to gouge most of the town of Martiana, in southern Norway, from the face of the earth. On the morning of the 20th another trawl, or the same one, descended and gouged the bed of the Mediterranean just off Capri and in full sight of its shore. A little before noon on the 21st a trawl was glimpsed plowing a vast wound in the Sudan desert near a British outpost. And 3 hours later a trawl cut a terrific trail of annihilation squarely across the city of Algiers. Earth and the races of the earth rocked beneath those fearful cataclysms, striking in such swift succession. With them the activities upon which our races of man had been so fearfully bent, the manufacture of the air mines, began to dwindle. By the 20th the number of air mines released had fallen off a little, and after the catastrophes of that and the next day it was even smaller. Dr. Howard's report showed that on the 22nd but 400 air mines had been released in comparison with the 1,200 released but 3 days before. Mankind was giving up the battle in despair. Panic was breaking loose over the earth, a panic and dread that nothing could restrain. Toiling thousands quit their work upon the manufacture of air mines in hopeless despair. Mobs began to appear in the streets of London, New York, Shanghai, and Sydney, and rioting became general. The world was going mad with fear. Dr. Howard strove above all else to keep the manufacture of the air mines going. Under his urgent pleadings the governments of Earth used their troops to protect and continue that manufacture as well as might be, instead of using them to suppress the growing riots. The production of the globes leaped again to almost 1,000 a day. Each day saw them whizzing up to join the thousands upon thousands already floating at the surface of Earth's atmosphere. And yet it seemed all so futile. It was not like striking back at a visible enemy, this frantic manufacture and release of the mines. Men would have been happier by far, I think, had they faced more terrible enemies in the plain light of day. I know that in those last days of an apparently disintegrating world I would have been easier in mind. It's a race against time now, Ransom, said Dr. Howard. We cannot continue the production of air mines much longer, and civilization is crashing now. But is there no other way? I cried. My God, Howard, these air mines are useless. We've sent up tens of thousands and they can be no more than a sprinkling in the vast extent of the atmosphere's surface. To try some other way. There is no other, he exclaimed. Ransom, we must fight it out to the end. The air mines, they're our one chance. But we can't send up many more, I said. The rioting in Germany has become so bad that all the factories save 2 that were making mines there have quit. We've no more than a dozen factories left in Europe and hardly more than that in America. As long as we can release one mine we'll do so, he declared. Man's crisis is here, and he's got to have the courage now to fight in the dark against an unknown foe for his existence. Somehow Dr. Howard's indomitable will held together in those last days the thread of organization between the factories and their sources of supply, despite the widespread outbreaks that were going on. Fewer and fewer were becoming the air mines released, but still they were being made and sent whizzing upward. But on the 25th it became apparent to all that our last efforts were flickering out. Then late on that day came news of the 10th trawl. It had descended 100 miles south of Rio de Janeiro to crash across a plantation with the loss of a score of lives. And hardly had the dread news spread around the earth than came word that the trawl had again flashed down a few hours later to gouge a terrific scar from the side of one of the peaks of the Peruvian Andes. The end. With the spreading of those two reports it seemed so. For they so deepened the blind and unreasoning fear that had gripped mankind that the production of air mines all but ceased on that day, only a few dozens continuing to be assembled and released. Panic-mad mobs caused chaos in the greater cities. Every organization of civilization seemed breaking down, and troops called to suppress wild outbreaks fought pitched battles with the mobs. On the night of the 26th came the crisis for mankind. For it was known that all man's efforts to halt the menace from above had failed, that mankind lay defenseless beneath the grim and terrible invaders from beyond, who might at any time loose even greater horrors upon us. Man had fought an enemy he had never even seen and had lost. He had fought an enemy who apparently cared no more for the wrecking of mankind far beneath than we do of the insects beneath our feet. Victory? Through the hours of that dread night I sat with Dr. Howard and with the last of our remaining organization in the Washington office. Outside, to the east the sky was red with the glow of flames, where a mob had set fire to looted buildings. From afar we heard the crackle of shots, the rumble of hurrying tanks, and the wild uproar of cries as troops sought to bring order out of the chaos of a dissolving civilization. We were silent, in a silence that made each minute age-long. And it was there, silent, almost toward morning, that the last messenger of mankind's hope found us. He was a disheveled young radio operator, and it was some moments before we comprehended what he was babbling frantically forth to us. When we did, 20 minutes saw us in the air and speeding southward through the night with an army aviator. Over the fear-mad, riot-blazing city and through the night out over other cities we sped, at the plane's utmost velocity, Dr. Howard peering ahead with face set, I gripping the cockpit's rim with nervous, trembling fingers. We were still speechless as our plane raced southward. It was not until dawn was streaking the sky eastward that the plane bumped down into a field a few miles from a little Georgia village. We found men awaiting us, in uniform and civilian clothes, and all were half hopeful, half awed. Swiftly they told us what had happened. Shortly after midnight citizens near the village had heard a faint, almost inaudible but clear sound of detonation, coming as though from far above. Almost in the next instant had come another detonating sound, as faint as the first, and then silence. But a few instants later, coming from the west of the village, they heard in quick succession two terrific prolonged crashings as of some thing or things falling from an immense height. They had thought the trawl was descending on them, at first, and had fled from it for some distance. But after moments of hesitation they had made their way to the scene of the crashes, and what they found had made them get word quickly to the soldiers in a nearby town, whose first act had been to radio Dr. Howard. The captain, who was the commanding officer, told this much to Dr. Howard. Together we went across the grassy fields. Before us, as we rose over a slope, there loomed a great column of steam going up into the sparkling light of day. We went very near to it before we halted. So near that we could see even through its veiling mists great shattered masses of glittering metal, buried almost completely in the soft earth, from which they had smashed a huge crater in striking. We stared at it for a time, not daring to go nearer for the heat that had caused the steam still radiated intensely from the shattered metal. Not far across the fields was a thinner steam column, and they told us that the colossal metal mass that caused it was buried even deeper in the earth, so deep that hardly any part of it could be distinguished. Dr. Howard and I stared at the two giant geysers of white vapor. It was victory, we knew. Victory, whether partial or complete, over the space visitors who had held Earth beneath such a spell of terror. Far above, cruising on the surface of Earth's atmosphere, two of their mighty vessels had struck a field of the air mines we had released, had crashed in shattering annihilation through the dark night. Victory! Yet it was not as I had dreamed the victory would be. I had thought of a wild climax after a terrific battle. It was so strange, so different. Just Dr. Howard and I and the khaki-clad soldiers and the wondering villagers, standing there in the soft light of the Georgia dawn, in the quiet fields with only the sound of birds about us, gazing so quietly toward those twin gigantic steam columns. Then realization of what it meant struck through to my terror-numbed heart. Victory, whether partial or complete, it meant the dissolution of the spell of horror that had gripped Earth, the gathering of Earth's forces to carry on the struggle, if need be, against foes whom we now knew were not invincible. Victory, and in a few moments the word of it would be flashing out around the Earth. Our victory proved complete after all, at least in so far as it marked the end of the terrible trawlings. Whether the two huge spaceships that had met their end over Georgia were the only ones to come to Earth, or whether there were others that were forced to flee by this destruction of their fellows, we cannot say. We know only that after the fall of those two through the night, the colossal trawls did not descend again. But for days, weeks, and months, the world waited in anxious dread for their reappearance. We have come of age. Even now that dread has not disappeared, wholly. For never again will Earth seem to us the isolated globe that it once was. We know now that there are ships that come and go out there in the great void, ships from some near or far planet. They came once to visit the Earth, to trawl in its air ocean with their giant scoops, and they may come again. We cannot say that they will not. We can but pray that they will not. Of their nature we know no more than before. Dr. Howard and the greatest scientists of the world have examined with the utmost minuteness the two great metal wrecks in Georgia, but have been able to learn comparatively little from them, so fused into molten metal were they by their plunge down through the atmosphere. The glittering metal of which they were constructed has proved quite strange and impossible to produce on Earth. There have been found half-melted instruments or mechanisms in small number, whose purpose we cannot as yet understand. What of the beings who manned those mighty ships? That is perhaps the greatest question of all, and the most insoluble. A thin coat of strange glistening slime was found on a few parts of the two wrecks not melted. Whether that is all that remains of the space visitors of those ships, whether their bodies were solid or liquid or even gaseous or merely force emanations, we can offer only theories. The world has recovered fully from those days of horror, and in recovering has given to Dr. Howard the honors due him. He is beyond all question the greatest figure in the world today, and even on myself, as his companion and assistant, some of his fame has fallen. For he is the hero not of any single group or nation or race of men, but of all mankind. He has used the tremendous influence that is his alone to urge preparation upon the world, preparation for emergencies of a similar nature that may again arise. Out of the unknown came these dread space visitors to Earth, he warns in an article, and who knows but that somewhere in the unknown even today other grim vessels are winging through the void toward the Earth. It may even be that our present peace is only a respite and that we have repelled the first attack of these unknown beings only to have them coming again upon us in infinitely greater numbers. Sometime in the future, I think, man will have advanced in knowledge to the point where he too will venture into the void, will be able to meet his attackers face to face. But until then the air mines are our only protection. I want to see vast fields of them floating on the surface of Earth's atmosphere, fields through which no invading spaceships from the void outside can make their way. For Providence may not again aid our efforts. Man is probably but one being among the universe's countless races of living creatures, and he can only hold his planet against others by his own wisdom and strength. Never again can he feel the false security that was ours before these space visitors came. This warning, surely, we are heeding, yet even with the loss of that old false security, we do not face the future with fear. Whatever beings of power the universe holds, we realize now that we too are beings of power. We have fought for our planet against the space visitors and have held it. As a race we have come of age. The end.